All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very fascinating guest with us today for the Real Takes Tennis podcast. Drew Van Orderlain, very interesting story. Current head pro at his tennis club. Just recently got his first ATP point at the tender age of 29. We should have a great story on persistence, determination, and probably tons of stories on futures and challenger circuits. So looking forward to diving deeper with Drew here. Drew, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Super happy to be on the show this evening and excited for a good conversation.
That's awesome, man. So what we usually like to do is we just start off chronologically, right? I think let's give the viewers a little background on maybe kind of how you got into tennis, what drew you to the sport, kind of the early days of your childhood.
Absolutely, yeah. So I grew up in Western Massachusetts, and so not a huge tennis community. Both my parents were, fairly regular jobs, both teachers to a degree. My mom was a teacher, and my dad worked in a museum for most of my life. So just fairly regular background. My dad played tennis recreationally, just like 4-0, 4-5 type level, like club. And so that was how I picked it up. Actually, I picked it up really young. I was probably like 2 years old, and I just started smashing balls around the living room. So my parents realized pretty quickly they had to just take me out to the courts. So I think tennis definitely found me to a degree in the early years there. And then
And
yeah,
keep going. Yep.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna ask, maybe this is fast forwarding a little bit, but uh, P and I, both of our dads also played. They were the type to be pretty vocal about their feedback to us. How are your parents in terms of, those interactions pre-match, post-match? Was it pretty chill? Was there a lot of tension? Because me and P have, we always say we have some trauma on those 2 hour drives back from Sacramento.
Oh no, of course, there's definitely a lot of you know, car stories and not wanting to get in that car after the match for sure. But I can't do any. I have nothing but appreciation though because just from the beginning they take me out to the court and throw me balls and whatever, and it was always the best intentions. So while there may be a little bit of scarring of getting yelled at after matches or this and that, it was I'd say it was mostly positive. So appreciative of that for sure.
Well said, well said. And we talked to Big Chris, who, another player from New England area. He did mention that kind of finding good players in your area wasn't necessarily hard, but you guys were definitely kind of fewer and further in between. So maybe could you tell us a little bit about that New England tennis culture, the junior scene as you were developing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's Western Mass is very interesting because not a lot of people know about it because Boston gets all the attention of Massachusetts, so the Springfield area doesn't get quite as much burn. But actually, the throwback Tim Mayotte was top 10 way back. I can't remember exactly what year, but he was top 10 in the world, and he's from Springfield. He runs an academy, I think now somewhere in Massachusetts, but there's another guy, Val Wilder, who I think was top 100 maybe in the 80s or so, and he's from Westfield, Massachusetts. So there's few and far between, but there is kind of a rich history there. And now I got pretty lucky because, random experience, because I just live in just a random small town, but about 2 miles from me is a legendary tennis player, Arthur Carrington. So he was like the second highest ranked black player for a while, like way back. And he was in the Althea Gibson documentary. And so he's been around and he was, very close to me. So I will say that I was very lucky. I didn't really go to him much when I was very young, but when I was older, probably like 14, 15, 16, I would always just ride my bike down the street or whatever and like work out in his yard and go to the courts with him. He'd pick me up sometimes. So I was actually pretty blessed in that regard to have him around.
That's a crazy story because, it sounds like even though maybe there wasn't the volume per se of like a Southern California or a Texas or a Florida, you still have the talent. Um, and again, it may be scattered, but it's there. And like you said, I mean, these are some legends that you just mentioned. Did you play any other sports growing up, or was it just kind of? It sounds like you were into tennis pretty early.
No, yeah, so I did play every sport growing up pretty much, I think. So I at least tried to. So I played soccer like every year for a long time. I played football like one season. I played hockey a couple seasons. I played baseball a lot. I'd say I probably specialized in tennis. I was probably around like maybe 13, I want to say. I was probably 13. But up until I was 13, and even I think when I was 13, I was still playing lots of other sports.
Damn, yeah, that's pretty late. I feel like me and P usually hear people kind of committing maybe 10 or 11. Do you think those sports, uh, do you think it was really helpful to play other sports in addition to tennis?
Yeah, honestly, I do. I think I felt the most benefit from hockey. Hockey is just you have to be just incredibly like agile and fit and in the balance, and a lot of the movements are very similar to tennis. So I'd always find like after hockey that I'd be like super quick on the tennis court and I wouldn't really lose anything. Um, I will say that a couple of the sports I'd feel a little bit slower with. The one season I played football, I felt like slower after, which was weird. But basically I just play tennis through like the whole season. So when I practice like, whatever, 3 days a week or whatever it was, and I'd be at tennis practice the other days of the week. And so basically when I was like 12, 13, I was having like good success in the juniors. So then I was just like, and I was playing that throughout all the other sports as well. So that I just realized that that was probably going to be the route to take. And I love tennis. Like I said, I've been smashing balls around the living room since I was a small child. So
Yeah, hopefully no concussions from football. I always get scared hearing the slowing down after a sport like that.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Now, one other question I had for you about kind of the junior development for you is I saw that you were 131 in the country freshman year of high school, and you got up to top 90 on tennis recruiting by end of senior year. So, what kind of contributed to that improvement? And do you have any, going back in time, do you have any advice to, let's say, juniors or parents of juniors about that critical time kind of between 13 and 17, how to optimize for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say that I do, and I tell my students that I think it's beneficial to play sports when they're younger, just because the all-around athleticism I think is so important. So I think that developing those other athletic skills is incredibly important from a young age. Um, then the other thing was to not worry so much about the younger age divisions like 12 and 14 because people develop at like different ages and different times people grow. Like I was always a small kid. And I had like decent success when I was younger, but the 12 and unders is always tough because like the ball always like with the lobs and the heavy shots and being a small kid, I just get, bullied around the court to a degree with that. And yeah, so I think the main jump was just to keep focusing on my game. I started working more, like I said, with Arthur Carrington and his son Lex Carrington, who, worked with many top players as well. So I started, working out with them much more, almost every day I was with them. And so yeah, I mean, I really just attribute to that and just working on developing the game because they're all about that too. They like to do more of developing the game, not necessarily so worried about the tournaments at a younger age. And I think that that's just super important because you've seen a lot of stories where people are so successful in the 12 and unders and 14 and unders, and it almost hinders them later on down the line because they have so much success and then they're not used to them when the kids start getting bigger and hitting bigger shots, and then the matches are just so tough and physical that they're just yeah they're not used to that. So I think that that's can
Yeah.
be a negative.
Yeah, this is super fascinating to us, obviously, right? Like these are two themes that we've heard throughout, right? Like of A, playing multiple sports and not specializing in one sport to give you that overall athletic field, but also the strategy of winning in 12s and 14s is different from what you need in order to win in 16s and 18s and even like the subsequent levels, right? I'm actually curious, like in your experience or in your time in juniors, like what was your routine like in terms of how you structured your practices or workouts in throughout that junior period of time where you like continued to get better, right? Like for us, for example, we were playing probably every day or 6 times a week. We'd play like we'd do the 2.5 hour clinics, and that was like what our practice was, right? And we've seen like other pros who were homeschooled at an early age. We've seen pros that played like an hour and a half a day, right? And so I'm curious, like what your like practice routine looked like in high school.
Yeah, right. So I would do a lot of the clinic type things. So like I said, I didn't have quite the financial backing that some people have. Um, so that being said, like whenever I could be on the court with, like I said, Lex or Art, and a lot of times they had students, so I would just be a hitting partner for their students, and I would just try to pick up on whatever I possibly could. So I would just hit with anybody, with them anytime they wanted to pick me up or they needed someone to hit with someone. So that's how a lot of times I was able to get extra practices because yeah, they would just call me and I'd listen to everything they said. I'd listen to everything they were saying to the other person, and I would just try to incorporate it all to myself because I didn't have quite as much of the private one-on-one stuff for myself. But I think it was good to try to figure that out, and to have to figure all that out, I think is crucial for tennis in the long run and just for development because yeah, problem solving is key.
Yeah, for sure, right. And it also helped you build your own mental model for like how you approach points and how you like approach a winning strategy. And I think one of the things we saw was that the ATP website lists you at like 5'8", 145. And obviously now we see like tennis becoming more physical. Like a lot of the guys that are at the top are like really tall. And I'm curious at that size, like how did you feel like your approach was in terms of like winning points, right? Because this speaks to what you were talking about of like in the 12s and 14s, there's a lot of like moonballing, grinding, and 16s and 18s, like people trying to develop like more aggressive games. I'm curious how your approach was in terms of winning points and your strategy overall.
Right. Yeah, no, that's funny. Yeah, so honestly, I was always when I was in the 12s and 14s, I was always still trying to like crush the ball. I just thought I was like 6 feet tall, you know what I mean? So I would just always be trying to rip shots. I never really got caught up into that. So I had to kind of tone it back.
Continued the smashing balls in the couch on the into the actual court, I see.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that didn't always serve me well in the 12s and 14s. But as I got older, I had the speed of shot, so that wasn't really necessarily an issue. But I never really hurt people too much because I didn't have that big of a shot. So I just made my fitness a goal, and I would just make sure I was running a lot and doing a lot of running, and I just wear people down. So for the juniors, most of my junior career, I would just grind people out and wear people down and that sort of thing. I didn't really go for shots, which is funny because most people it's like the opposite, right? Like they're like younger and they're lobbing and pushing, and then they get older and then they're ripping the shot. But for me, it was like the opposite. I was like ripping the ball in the 12 and unders, and then I got more tame and I was just grinding people out, and yeah, with that type of mentality, just run all day and play 3 4 hour matches, and just nobody wanted to play me. So
You're looking at a couple back fence grinders as well, so we know exactly what you're talking about here. I don't think I hit a ball past the service line until I was about 16. So definitely understand that ordeal. But you know what's fascinating about what you just said is we talked to Reese Stoller a couple weeks ago, who's I think he's top 60 in the world now, and he mentioned something really similar to you, which is that he had a really aggressive game style growing up, and he found it was easier to kind of temper back that game style than have to develop weapons later on. I wonder if you could speak to, what do you think that mindset of ripping was innate, or was it something that you kind of developed between, say, like when you start picking up the racket to 11 or 12 in the tournaments?
yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that it's just kind of fun to hit hard for me. I like to kind of make interesting shots or run down and like rip a shot. So yeah, I think that I one Art Carrington, he would call me an escape artist a lot of times. That's what he'd call me. So I would just just run all day and I'd make up some ridiculous shot like on the run. So I just kind of had fun doing that, just running and then like I don't know, ripping the shot. I don't know. That was just always fun to me. So I think that was the reason.
Nice. And then fast forwarding a little bit, um, talk to us about your decision after high school. What was next, right? A lot of people toil over that decision of kind of going to college, going pro. Uh, how'd you evaluate what was right for both life and tennis when you were, 17, 18?
Yeah, so I always just kind of assumed that I would go to college. Um, And I actually did go to community college. I was technically homeschooled for most of high school, although I went to community college in Massachusetts when I was 16. So I would do part-time at a community college as like part of my high school education and whatnot. And I always wanted to play pro tennis, and as I started getting higher in the rankings, I started seeing that maybe it was potential. Now, I really didn't know anything about it. Like I said, I didn't really have the tennis background or the knowledge behind that. So how I found out about professional tournaments actually was my friend who was in college when I was still that last year in the juniors. He went and played, I think it was the 10K at the time in Pittsburgh over the summer. And I used to practice with him all the time. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to like a 10K like pro tournament in Pittsburgh." And I was like, "What? Like they just let you in?" And he's like, "Oh, I have like a national ranking or whatever from like college and like so I can get in." And it just blew my mind. I was like, "So you can literally just go to a 10K with a national ranking and sign in?" He's like, "Yeah." So I just changed my whole like outlook because I didn't really know the path of pro tennis, and I was just thinking college at the time, and especially since I was part-time at a community college, I just assumed that. And then I just kind of had almost like a switch. I was like, wait a minute here. So I went and I played one event. I actually just looked it up before we got on because I couldn't remember when it was. So it was 2012 was the first ITF event I ever played. So that would have been when I was 18 years old. So like I said, yeah, right at the end of the juniors there. So I went down to Florida and I played it. I got in based off my national ranking, and it was like 128 qualifying draw back then too. So they just let everybody who had $40 in for the most part. But yeah, I played and I lost, but it was like I lost like 6-4, 6-4, I think it was, and I was just like, I can do this. Like I knew that I wasn't quite there at the time. I was like obviously I have work to do, but I saw that it was like attainable, and I was watching the other guys at the tournament, and I was like, I think I can do this. So I called up a couple friends. I had another friend who kind of wanted to do the same thing. He was fairly high ranked junior. So he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." So we got an apartment in Florida. Well, first, I'll say that I was coaching like part-time at the time. So I saved up money like when I realized for probably about that year. So when I realized when I played that first tournament, I saved up money for like the next year basically. And then yeah, I split the apartment with my friend in Florida and just hustle, do whatever I could to keep that apartment up. But yeah, just go play tournaments. And at that time there was like, you know, 8 weeks in a row of tournaments in Florida. And then there'd be like other times throughout the year where there'd be so almost like 3 months, 3 or 4 months of the year, there's tournaments in Florida. So I was like, well, this just makes sense based off like a whatever. The apartment was cheaper than it would have been for hotels and like all of this. So, and that just kind of got me into the Florida scene and into like the more serious professional type tennis scene. So yeah, I pretty ran with that for 2013, 14. And that was kind of my plan was to start getting like stronger and better. Cause I saw, like I said, in 2012, I was like, I probably need like 2 years, like 2, 3 years to be, kind of at that level where I'm winning more consistently and hopefully winning main draw matches and that type of thing.
Yeah, I love that story about, resourcefulness and how you kind of self-funded because usually, I mean, folks, tennis is a rich man's sport, right? So to be able to fund your career by completely from your coaching money is really cool to hear. One question I have is when you moved down to Florida, how were those initial few tournaments? Like it sounds like you felt you were right there. You lost the first match maybe 4-4, but what did you realize that you had to kind of improve on from those first couple tournaments, and how'd you develop a plan to get to the next level?
Yes. So, well, first of all, it was the Florida. I realized I needed to be like down south in the winters because the New England winters were killer. In the wintertime, it's just brutal to get courts, and there's just tons of people to practice with. So just because in the juniors, it seems a little bit slower, and you can get away with grinding a lot more. So, I grind out, and then I grind and grind and grind, and then the other guy's grinding too, and then rips a big forehand, and now, you know what I mean? It's over. So I realized I needed to get, you know, more aggressive, obviously. Like that's the main thing. I needed to get more aggressive and just continue the fitness and like in the professional level, even in the futures qualifyings, which are still tough, like everybody's at a decent level. Everybody was that top junior level and everybody's, at that college level. So just every match is tough. You can't take anybody for granted or anything like that. There's no easy matches. Just every time you got to come ready to play. So that's I think the main shift.
Talk to us a little bit about your like focus in terms of how you're constructing your workouts or your game plans for fitness and for improving yourself or becoming more aggressive, right? Like what types of specific drills and such are you working on during this time?
Yeah, so I will say, just as a broader level, I would consider my professional career in like kind of two phases. One would be that like 2013 to about 2018, and then would be from about 2021 to present. So in that 2013 period, like I said, I realized I need to get more aggressive. The roommate that I was down there with, we would train all the time, and like I said, didn't necessarily have the money for coaches, so we weren't really having coaches and just trying to train each other for the most part. So I think that that was kind of a flaw to a degree. We jumped around to a few different coaches and a few different physical training people. None of them seemed to like really gel or to work out. So it was kind of a steep learning curve for sure for a while. So while I saw what I needed to do, or while I saw what I needed to do, I wasn't necessarily able to achieve it all the time because yeah, just trying trial and error a lot of time. Because a lot of fitness people don't understand like tennis and explosive movements. They're more like into bodybuilding and that type of thing. And then a lot of coaches don't necessarily understand your game. And then it's tough when you don't have like an established relationship. So I felt like we all struggled that, me and the guy that I was roommate with. So yeah, I felt like we both struggled with that. Um, yeah.
Anything you would change if you were to go back in time during that first phase that you described?
Yeah, so I think that I sort of kind of had to go through that period or yeah, as painful as it was, but because I was trying to find coaches and I was trying to do the right thing and I was trying to find the physical trainers and I was really trying to do that and it just wasn't necessarily panning out a lot of the times. So going back, maybe would have just done more research myself, which is what I ended up doing. Just doing tons of research myself into maybe like the exercises I needed to do, into the drills that I needed to do. And I didn't always have a coach to feed me the drills or do that sort of thing. So a lot of times, like I said, I knew what I needed to be doing and didn't always have that opportunity. I could have for sure been more self-sufficient. So going back, that's what I would have done instead of trying to find maybe coaches all the time and it doesn't work out. Then I would have just gone back and done it myself and done a lot more myself. So I
Damn,
think
dude.
that's it.
Yeah, fascinating. I don't think you should beat yourself up about being resourceful and learning the game on your own. It sounds like you did a lot of this on your own, whereas even me, Pete, most people we know have coaches, clinics, physical trainers, full-time academies behind us. So it's pretty cool to hear. I'm curious about, so you described how there are two phases in your career, and obviously COVID was a big part of that second phase. How did that impact your game? Any stories from COVID? We talked to Big Chris again earlier, and he was, or maybe it was Alec, talking about how one of his matches was stopped midway through because of COVID. How'd you get through that period?
Yeah, so actually, surprisingly, COVID didn't affect me too bad, and I'll get to that in a minute. But like 2016 to 2018, I felt like I started to get a lot better and the things started to come together because I was being more self-sufficient. And now the reason that I would classify it in two sections is because I just looked at this too because I was curious about this because I couldn't exactly remember. The last tournament I played was September of 2018, September 10th in Canada. And I was playing, I thought, really well at this time. But I had to get rid of my apartment because I didn't want to renew the lease anymore in Florida. So I was kind of in a transition. I went back to Massachusetts and I was snowboarding and I had a pretty horrendous like snowboarding crash. So that was in January of 2019. So I kind of like destroyed myself a bit. And that, is the main start of like my coaching career, kind of. Well, I'll take that back because I was coaching when I was 16. So I started coaching, like I said, and hitting partner and that type of thing for the Carringtons and whoever I could. So I'd been doing that for a while, but then I came back and I was injured and I was just coaching. So that was kind of the main like starting point actually of my coaching career.
Damn, dude, sorry to hear that. That is brutal. Injuries and illness are the worst because you just cherish your health after they happen.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
How'd you end up? recovering from that? How is the rehab process? Uh, and ultimately now, do you kind of feel that you're back to 100%?
Yeah, so I would say that I am. I think I'm playing, I've been playing best tennis of my life the past like year or so, or maybe probably 8 months. So yeah, probably the last year or so. So I think that I have gotten back that point, but it wasn't until about, 6, 8 months ago. It took a long time. So basically I wasn't able to like play. I would try to play tennis. Yeah, I would try to play tennis like every 2 weeks and everything would just be like so painful and terrible. So I didn't even realize because I kind of powered through it, but I had like a compression fracture in my neck and I had a pretty brutal concussion. I had like a laceration, like top of my head, I had like staples, like I got knocked out. So the concussion rehab was what took honestly probably the longest. So I was doing concussion rehab for like 6 months, and yeah, that was pretty brutal. But I would try playing tennis like every couple weeks, and everything would just hurt. And I was on the court like coaching or whatever. But yeah, I just wasn't really able to do much. So I was just kind of relax, coach, do whatever. And when I started feeling better, I'd start getting back on the court as much as I could. And obviously, I had that goal, but I did have a lot of reflection time during that period, and I just realized that maybe I didn't quite do things as well as I could have the first time around, and that I really wanted to get back and to play tennis or to be like at that top level of fitness in tennis because it's just so much fun playing tournaments and traveling around. So I just really realized how much I love that and missed it. So I just realized that I was gonna just put everything back in, even though I was like older, because I was thinking, I'm like, damn, like I thought it might be the end of like my tennis career for a while. Like I thought, you know, this might be the end. Like coaching, I could see like, just coaching, whatever, and that's it. But I didn't want to let that happen. So I just did everything that I possibly could and realized the things that I could have done better the first time. Like I said, more fitness, more research myself to know, what my body needs. And I feel like all the work that I did coaching and that type of thing, like set me up well to be able to coach myself. It's really hard to do that because it's hard to look at yourself like objectively. So that's the main issue. But I just realized that I was going to have to do like so much more, on my own and so much more research and just do it myself. But I had the motivation after that because I realized, like you said, how lucky I was just to be still, walking around.
Yeah, I mean, this is super fascinating, and obviously, like a couple points to touch on here, right? Because I mean, it's the type of thing where you've been playing for so long, and in order to like play and like continue to get better, right? You need to establish a rhythm, but it's hard when you're injured and are struggling to like find health. I'm curious, like over this past year, you've obviously played like a lot of you played against guys all across like the world and stuff. And on your point of like traveling and stuff and being more self-sufficient, how are you like when you play guys that you might not have heard of or play guys that does not establish like footage from, how are you establishing or how are you creating like a game plan maybe before the match, or what's your approach, or do you just figure it out when you get in the match itself?
Yeah, so I've always been pretty improvisational. So, and I feel like that's a strength that I have is able to figure it out and see that. And I think the coaching helps a lot with that too, because as you're coaching, you're like, oh, you need to work on this, you need to work on that. Or so I felt like I would try to translate that to my tennis game when I was playing tournaments, and I'd be like, oh, like what would I be, if I was coaching the guy, what would I be working on? What's he breaking down on, like that type of thing. So I think that the coaching helped a lot with that. And yeah.
One question is beyond coaching during that period after injury, how did you stay occupied? Were there any new kind of hobbies you developed, or were you still just itching to get back on the court and play at the highest level?
Yeah, so I didn't really have much hobbies because I'm just super athletic. Like I most of the things I do were, outside or athletic. Like I said, snowboarding was how I destroyed myself. So I mean, I was out, snowboarding, and I'm just always like doing something athletic. So I mean, it really put a squash on like, basically all the hobbies I had. So didn't really pick too much up during that time period.
Got you. One track mind.
Yeah.
I was gonna say like based not like earlier this year, right? You got like we talked a little bit about how you got your first ATP point. I'm curious, like describe the feeling you had like when you won that, when you got your first ATP point, and like what the milestone represented, right? Because a lot of players don't get their first ATP, like people get their first ATP point at various stages, and you happen to get yours at like this early this year. Talk to us a little bit about what that feeling was like, whether you thought what you thought your mindset was going into the match, and kind of what it represented.
Yeah, so I struggled with that for a long time because I even back to that like 2016 to 2018 period, I think I lost like maybe 7 or 8 main draw matches. So I was like starting to qualify, do really well, like up into that time period. So I felt like my level was right there before, and after the injury, it took me, probably a long because my next tournament after that was in 2021. So that was the first ITF tournament that I played back after that. So basically 2 years time. And for that 6 or 8 months that I wasn't doing anything, it took me another like 6 or 8 months to even be into like sort of playing shape. And then another 6 or 8 months before I felt like I was in, decent playing shape. So yeah, a year, and then that year, so that would bring us to, so it was 2021, and then that would bring us to 2022 or 2021, the first tournament I played back again. It was I felt decent, but still like I had a long way to go. And that was like 2 years. So then it took me probably another year before I felt like really good. So then that's where I was going with that. So to bring us to about 2023. So then I felt strong 2023. I was going to play as much as I possibly could. I still have been like coaching over the summer. So that was how I was sufficing a lot of times. And for that period, so I probably coached for a full year when I got injured. And then I would coach in the summers after that. Like up in New England, there's, some good opportunities to coach in a country club that I ended up working for as the head tennis pro, I think, as you mentioned. And then more recently, I became the head junior pro at another club, and that's just over the summer. So I've been trying to do as much as I can over the summer as far as teaching, and then just play the whole rest of the year other than that. But to go back to your question about the ATP point, I'd been qualifying for like the past year, basically of 2023. Like I would qualify or last round of qualies a lot of times. I think I lost in 2023 like six or seven main draws. So all in one year. So I easily could have had a lot of points, and I lost. One was like 6-4 in the third set. One was like 7-5 in the third set. Another one in three sets. So I mean, I was in there, and then right before I got the point, I qualified the week before. I was playing really good tennis. Match didn't go my way, and then that week it was actually an altitude in Mexico, and I grew up playing indoors, so the altitude and the fast conditions seemed to kind of suit me and because I hit kind of more flat than a lot of players, so the flat ball is like tough in the altitude to hit up and go long. So yeah, I think I won that match 4 in love actually. So I felt pretty good. There was no necessarily tight moments at the end there, which I'll take because the year before I played, I think in Ohio, and I was playing good tennis. I was up a set 6-2, 5-4. The other guys serve, but I broke him a couple times like throughout the match. I was feeling good on the returns, like 30 all in the serve game, and I ended up losing that match in the third set. And I was that was brutal for a while because that was my last match of the 2022 season, I think. So that was a rough one. I thought I had it, and I got tight there on the finish line, and that was rough going into the off season. But it kind of gave me more motivation, and then the whole year, I was getting close the whole year of 2023, and then finally it went my way. So,
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I mean, it must be so, I can't even imagine how relieving it must be to kind of get that monkey off the back. Um, and hopefully this leads to a lot more success. But one question I had is reflecting back on, this pretty long two-phase journey. What do you have any kind of crazy futures stories or challenger stories or matches that you'd want to share?
definitely a few. I don't know that I can necessarily share on here.
All good.
Um, but I will say that I was in, I think, Sharm el Sheikh in 2016, and that trip
It's a
was,
classic place.
yeah, classic, right? And that trip was an absolute blast. I think I it was kind of rough because I lost, I think, 3 out of 4 weeks I played there. I lost main draw, so I made main draw 3 out of 4 weeks, and I lost every time. I think one of them I actually played Joe Salisbury, which is funny. So I
Yeah,
played Joe
that's a top
Salisbury.
player right
Actually,
there.
Dan
Yep.
Evans was there. He
Wow.
won one of the tournaments, and yeah, so I would actually chill with him a bunch. We'd go to the pub and like play pool. We wouldn't drink, but we'd be at the pub like playing pool. There was like the one spot you could get Wi-Fi at Sharm el Sheikh. So like everybody would go there in the evenings because the Wi-Fi was like terrible. So we'd go there and like shoot some pool and like hang out. So the British boys. So some good times with the British boys there.
That's awesome, man. Um, and then P, I don't know if you have any more stories or questions. I wanted to pivot over to kind of the coaching side. So on the coaching aspect, Drew, couple questions just to start off, right? I've always found coaching to be it's a really interesting way to sample kind of the next generation. Um, are there any generalizations about this next wave of players that you have in terms of strengths or weaknesses, or are there any trends you've been noticing in terms of how the game has been changing, both from being a coach and being on tour?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. There's a lot of parts to that question. So I would say that trends, I think one thing that we've talked about a lot is like the problem solving, which helped me like so much throughout my career. I think that a lot of kids aren't necessarily having to do the same level of problem solving, and I think that that sometimes hinders the ability to like create points when the kids are playing. Because a lot of times the stroke development's so good, everybody knows how to make a good forehand, a good backhand, like all that. And so I think that that's a big key. It's something that's been really applicable in my life. So I'm a little bit biased, but I think that that's key. Yeah, I think that's key. Everybody works on the ground strokes too. I think bringing back a little bit with the volleys and making sure to keep working on serves. A lot of times people forget about that. So you see that a lot of times in the games where people like in the juniors, they won't be comfortable coming to the net or the second serve. They don't have any spin. It's not kicking. It's not consistent. So I think that those couple things are pretty key.
Completely agree, right? Like the mental aspect and the problem solving aspect is what makes tennis like so challenging, right? And I'm curious, like talk us through a little bit of maybe examples of like where you've like seen your problem solving ability. Like what are the types of things you're telling yourself or you're asking yourself to try and find like holes in an opponent's game, right? Like are you focusing on rally tolerance? Are you focusing on attacking specific weaknesses? Like what are the specific things that you're looking at when trying to attack like a player or dissect a player?
Well, dissecting a player, I mean, like I said, I've always been good improvisationally on the court. So I think, and a lot of that comes from coaching, but just seeing like, oh, like their backhand's a little shaky here, or their forehand's a little shaky there, or they have a good wide serve but not a good tee serve, or whatever it is, and then just sort of imposing your will as a player too of what you like to do, my strengths. Like I like my backhand, so I got to try to make sure I'm staying aggressive on my backhand, and I take balls early well, so taking balls early, so trying to impose my will a bit, and then whatever I can do to break the opponent down.
Makes sense. And going back to coaching, we have all heard the phrase that the best coaches are oftentimes not the best players and vice versa. What makes a good coach and what's kind of your coaching philosophy?
Okay, so I agree with that, and I don't agree with that to a degree, because I mean, great, yeah, like okay, like top 10 in the world, maybe, right? Like that's kind of ridiculous, but like anybody who played for a Division 1 college, or anybody who's had that level of even a Division 2 college, anybody who's been out there and played, I wouldn't say that they don't necessarily know. I will say that in order to develop a great player, like I would say like top D1 athlete or professional tour, you kind of have to have someone that's just seen that road a little bit, unless they're just super dedicated and figuring it out themselves, just because it's so complicated and difficult. I don't know if that answered your question totally.
Yeah, yeah, no, it does. And I think just kind of a follow-up is maybe more on the coaching philosophy and what makes a good coach when when a new parent, let's say, comes up and tells you to coach their kid, right? How are you going about that conversation? What are you looking for? Um, and in particular, what are you looking for in a new student? What makes the student kind of coachable? Yep.
So I like working with beginners, right? Because it's always like easy to sculpt something, right? A lot of times you go to someone who hasn't had good coaching, and I feel like a lot of the pitfall of tennis is kind of mediocre coaching. I feel like there's a lot of coaches out there that don't necessarily understand, and then the kids don't have success, so they quit. And a lot of times, the reason that the program, I think, at the club that I'm at right now is much more active is because me and a friend of mine that also worked there, understand the game well. He played on the Futures Tour some as well, and I just think it makes such a difference and helping the kids out.
Makes sense. I'm curious, like now when you're like coaching beginners, right? Like what's your philosophy on like how you continue to like improve them or like how you continue to get them better at that early age?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I think just again is not getting too caught up in necessarily the success right then, because a lot of times,
Yeah.
well, beginner is like different, right? So beginner, you're just trying to like get them going, but a lot of times they improve so quickly. So you can make a beginner go to a really high level pretty quickly if they have proper coaching. But like say like a junior comes to me who wants to improve and get more top and they're playing some tournaments and that type of thing. I think it's just a lot sticking to the process, which I hate saying because, well, first of all, it's kind of cliche. And second of
Yeah, it's
all, like I
cliche.
said, with my experience with jumping around with coaches and that type of thing and not necessarily finding a good fit, I think that that can be terrible advice at times. But I think that if you have someone that like understands your game and that you mesh with as a coach and they have it at a decent level, that you should stick with them to a degree. Obviously maybe then you get like top and it doesn't work, you're playing ITFs and you need, something more like maybe I can understand that if they're not quite on the ball there. But I think yeah, if you find someone that is understands what they're doing, they like mesh and gel well. Because I've seen so many times and had the experience even myself where, you know, had players doing really well and then they start to see the level and then they maybe go to different places and trying to like jump around and fish around and then they take something from here and something from there and something from there and then it comes back all discombobulated and a lot of times it becomes so difficult. I've seen a lot of people go down that road and because like we talked about earlier of developing the game more for the 16s and the 18 and unders when people are growing into their bodies, you don't want to worry about, losing at a young age. And I feel like just developing all the fundamentals and the basics and good solid structure and then from there see where it goes.
Do you have any favorite drills for, let's say, at the different levels? Maybe a beginner, maybe a 14-year-old intermediate player, and then a more advanced player?
So drill like just like feeding drills? Is
Yeah,
that
feeding
what you're
drills
talking
or
about?
live ball drills.
Yeah, actually. Well, so I do one thing a lot. This works very well with beginners, very well with actually any level. Even I'll still do this myself sometimes, but kind of a zigzagging drill moving forward. So you hit probably like, anywhere between 8 and 12 shots, like per set, maybe six if you do less. You'll start either behind the baseline or at the baseline. You can do it any zone of the court. So say you're starting behind the baseline, you hit like, a deep one, you come in a little bit, hit another deep one to the other side. You keep zigzagging across the court and moving forward. And I think that's really good for just, coming back across the middle, recovery, for moving forward, transitioning forward. And you can also just do that with volleys too. So you're feeding volleys and you can start them, a step or two behind the service line or even halfway back and go zigzagging, but so that the person's continuously moving forward on the zigzag. So I think that that's a good one.
I like it. I definitely have some PTSD from our side to side drills that we used to do in the juniors. We would do something similar where I think there was a 4x4 box in each of the corners, and if you get it in the box, you get 2 points. Anything past the service line is one, and you got to get to 21. But it's usually a pretty intense side to side action, so
Yeah.
get pretty winded after a few rounds of that.
Yeah, I
Um,
feel that. So this one I like a little more than the side to side because a lot of times you do the classic side to sides and people end up getting farther and farther back behind the baseline. So that's kind of why I started doing that more was because, as you get tired, right, then you're slower. So then you have more time. So you're backing up. So I had this was so you continuously kind of moving forward. I feel like you don't necessarily get as tired to the end either. The point isn't like the cardio per se. So, but you do get some of that at the same time.
Makes
It's kind
sense.
of
Yeah.
similar to like I was just gonna say it's kind of similar to like what drill we used to do, like the X drill, right? Of like we
Oh,
start
of
off
course.
like
Yeah,
hitting like
yeah.
a deep
Right.
baseline, then like moving forward, then going back. And I mean you do that like 12 times and like obviously the goal is to like continue moving forward and like deal with various positions on the court, right? So pretty similar.
Absolutely.
And another thing I like about the drill you're describing is that a lot of times in those side to side drills, what ends up happening from my observation is the player doesn't actually recover. They just kind of turn and run the opposite direction. And when you start learning how to move diagonally across the court, you're forced into more lateral type movement, side shuffle, karaoke step, that kind of stuff, which is obviously the crux of tennis. Um, Another question I had on just how you kind of balance your day-to-day schedule now, because I feel like, you know, tennis is such a selfish sport and it's so hard to, you know, coach and give, but also take for yourself and improve. And I'm just curious how you manage that.
So it's definitely been a struggle, I will say that. But I do like coaching, like I said, I like seeing the kids get better. I really enjoyed it this summer too, and I like seeing kids get better and doing and being in that whole type of scene. But what I've done more recently is try to break it into like more sections of the year, like I said. So I try to do as much. So this summer, I was working for two clubs and just in it as much as I possibly could in the teaching realm. And then my goal is to play the whole rest of the year. So I mean, I played the 9 or 10, 9 weeks of tournaments from when I finished in September until the end of November. And now I'm in like a training block for, 3 or 4 weeks, see if I can improve my fitness game and all that. And then I'll be full time, in the beginning of the year up until probably looking like the summer again. So I find that that's good because I was able to maintain a lot more continuity within my playing career. And then honestly, it felt like it saved my body a little bit because, you're playing for 3, 4, 5, 6 months in a row, tons of tournaments, you start to feel, I mean, tennis is such a long season and injuries are a major part. So I honestly felt that it was good, for my body to not necessarily be like grinding all those hard hours. I will say I was like training, I was still in the gym and I was still on the court, but I would just have to be a lot more precise with my practices because I didn't have as much time. So I would just have to make sure like every time I'm on the court, it's really specific and there's really a lot of purpose. And and yeah, that's what I found to help me with that.
100% makes sense. I think the final question we have on our side is like talk to us a little bit about now that you're like healthy and now that you have like a good training block set up for the next couple months. Like I'm curious what your goals for the next year are, right? Like is the goal to continue to improve the like obviously continue to improve the game, but do you have any specific goals in terms of playing specific tournaments or getting to a ranking to get you into some of the other tournaments? Like what's the goal for 2024?
Yeah, so I think well my main like post-injury goal and just the main career goal, right, of any tennis player is to have ATP ranking. So I mean that was the, initial goal. Obviously, once I got that, now I just feel like it's about just seeing what I can do as far as just making myself as good as I possibly can. So I don't necessarily want to say like any numbers or things like that, but I think that I have a lot to improve on, and I think that I think that I still have a lot to offer as far as playing. So then that's really my goal is just to do as much as I possibly can in that regard, and the fitness and the tennis and all that, which I feel I haven't necessarily done as much as I could have done in the past. So
Love it,
see where it
man.
goes.
Yeah, that is awesome because it's December. The resolutioners are about to be out in full force, and we definitely do not take you as one of those guys from the commitment that you've had to our sport. So best of luck to you, and it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks for coming, Drew.
Thank you, and thank you for all that you guys do. Talking to some people that get really no burn in the top levels of the game, but I think that's it. It's important. There's a lot of good guys down at the lower levels and with interesting stories too. So I appreciate what you're doing as well.
Appreciate it, man.
Can't thank you enough, man.